Hey everybody, Zach here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about science and religion and certain parallels that I see between the two. I'm sorry if there's any background noise. I'm down in a subway station right now. It seems to be the most well-lit area that I could find at 2 in the morning in St. Louis while I'm biking around, and I'm also away from the street, so it's a little bit more quiet. Anyhow, I've been thinking about this topic for a while, and I think that there are a lot of different angles to it, and what I'm trying to really present more than anything is not that what I feel is a fact, but rather I'm trying to encourage a certain level of scrutiny and open-mindedness. It says my signal is weak. I'm going to move to another spot right here, because I'm kind of in a tunnel. I won't have my cool mural behind me now, though, but whatever. Alright, so I think that the main aspect of science that I feel makes it similar to a religion is the idea that it should not be questioned. And this is very different than the roots of science, which is all empiricism and observation. So what I'm doing is, I'm not talking down science as a whole. I'm putting an emphasis on modern science and trying to differentiate that from traditional science. And because I believe that empiricism and observation is obviously not any kind of stagnant construct, and it's very non-religious. It's just about exploring the world. So the first comparison I would like to make is between spirituality and religion, and then between science and modern science. Spirituality is a quest to understand and observe the world around us. And I think that traditional science shares this perspective. It is an exploration of the world around us. Modern science has developed into a certain level of dogma and a certain stagnancy, in that people feel that these theories are facts. And this is the same comparison as what you can see with religion. Religion started out as a spiritual construct and then developed over time into a stagnant construct, which is essentially something that is either rejected or accepted thoroughly. It's not open to changing much. There's certain variations of takes on religion, but overall it's a pretty stagnant idea. Okay, so moving on. I took a few notes on this. What really makes science seem like a religion, modern science, is the idea of authorities. There are scientific authorities, which the way that they gain a reputation in the popular culture is by climbing the institutional ladder. So this is kind of similar to religion if you think about it. To become a bishop or a pope or something like that, you're climbing an institutional ladder. It's not that you have some kind of inherent spiritual glow or prowess that becomes noticed by this institution and then you're allowed to be a leader in it. And the same thing as science. It's not that all of a sudden you're just really smart and you have this great perspective on science, so they throw you on the Discovery Channel and give you your own show. No, it requires institutional certification in climbing this ladder. And one of the inherent faults in this is the natural programming nature of the human psychology. As you climb an institutional ladder, whether it's a religious ladder or a scientific ladder, you're bound to wind up with a certain amount of dogmatic programming based on the levels of learning. And this brings me to my next point. Science, as well as religion, have roots at a certain point, seeds, if you will. If you look back the line in science, let's go back a couple hundred years, okay? There were alternative perspectives of science. One that comes to my mind is Edison and Tesla. They had various philosophies or various perspectives on science, and they were both essentially seeds. And at a certain point, the Edison constructs were a seed that was given root. It was planted into the culture, and it grew into the science that we have. And I'm not extremely versed in the history of science, but this same paradigm, this same crossroad goes all the way back through it. There are a lot of instances where there was a crossroad between two different scientific paradigms, and one of them was accepted and rooted into the culture, and the other one was denied and suppressed. And what we have today is essentially this very real and very solidified view of one of these seeds. It's as though it's a tree, and this tree is just so vast and powerful that it's not questioned. However, if you look back in the timeline, had the Tesla seed been planted, or had any of these previous scientific paradigm seeds been planted, what we would have now, hundreds of years later, is a completely different tree, a completely different construct, which would be perceived as equally as solid as what we perceive our current scientific paradigm. The same is true with religion. And again, I'm not a theologian, but I know enough about religious history to reference this. At the root of Christianity, there was the Gnostics, and then I'm not sure the name of the opposition or the counter to that, but the Gnostics perceived spirituality as being a living practice. The way that one got in touch with God was through meditations, essentially, connecting with spirit. In a Christian context, allowing the Holy Spirit to flow through you. And that was the Gnostic practice. And it was very much rooted in the same Christian fundamentals as what we currently have. At a certain point in history, the Gnostic perspective was shrugged under the carpet, and the current Christian paradigm rooted and grew. And the current Christian paradigm is reliant on institutional dogma. Listen to the Bible. Listen to authorities. Your preacher knows better than you. I'm not trying to say that that's 100% fact, but that's the general norm in the religious construct, is reliance on authority, reliance on institutional perspective rather than first-hand observation. And again, going back to this scientific paradigm, you can really see the similarity. Spirituality as being this first-hand experience, just as traditional science is first-hand experience. Looking around, studying nature, studying the world. Thank you, Ben. Glad you're feeling it. Let me see what my notes here. The root fundamentals. Okay, another good one, I think, is that many scientific ideas are speculative due to being unprovable and based on math alone. And this math that is used is based on fundamental math. So let's look at some modern science, quantum theory and things like that. You've got string theory and M theory and all these really advanced concepts, which, I mean, I love it. I'm super into science. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is not a take on anti-science, pro-spirituality. I see a balance between everything in life. But there is a certain, to respond to Amana here, certain aspects of modern science, I agree, do reject quantum and metaphysics, but other aspects or other authorities, I think, do agree and specialize in quantum. I mean, metaphysics, I guess you could say, is kind of rejected. But, I mean, I think that brings up a good point. There's always these counter theories, just like string theory, like I was getting to. This is accepted by huge groups of science, and then there's other genius scientists that totally go against it. But we have these paradigm norms in the scientific institution. The modern science is what we see projected through TV and things. And different ones get accepted at different times, and they start to be perceived as fact. And what I think is strange about this is that if we look at the root of why it's perceived as fact, it's based on something that was perceived as fact before it. And then if we look at that, it's perceived as something as fact before it. And a lot of it is these mathematical groundwork, which one idea is grown on top of the next, on top of the next, on top of the next. And that's how we find ourselves in these really advanced astrophysics and things, which, I mean, again, I love it and it's really fascinating. But it's kind of bizarre to think that we come to think that these things are just absolutely solid and absolutely factual, that they understand black holes and all these things, when really almost all of it is based on math. And that math, although sound and although verifiable by genius mathematicians, comes off of a framework of other math, and that is based on a framework of other math. And you can go all the way down the line to a certain equation or a certain, whether it's the theory of relativity, Einstein, or other mathematical groundwork, but they're built upon each other. So if we look at the possibility that some of these mathematical groundworks are incorrect, or if we look back down the line and see that there were counter theories that are also mathematical groundworks, it really brings us back to this open, free perspective of saying that really everything is fallible and everything is based off of an assumption. And I don't think it's bad to do these advanced math ideas. I think it's beautiful, but it's important, I think, to remember that everything is open to interpretation, and there's really nothing that is an absolute, and nothing is absolutely solid and absolutely certain. Everything is free-flowing and open to evolution. So I think that covers just about the majority of it. Oh, another important one before I end this is that this is one of the main things that for me made me really start seeing this scientific connection or religious connection, is the idea of opposing science. If right now I come forward and I say something that, well, I think that gravity doesn't exist, or I think that whatever, anything that is a seemingly accepted fact, I'm considered an idiot. I mean, I'm working on a very uphill battle to try to convince somebody that gravity doesn't exist or whatever. And I'm not saying gravity doesn't exist, but just as an example, it's strangely similar, wouldn't you say, to what we look back in the Dark Ages as being in opposition to religion. Somebody comes forward and they say something that opposes this norm, and they're considered a heretic. It's a very uphill battle. And nowadays, yeah, you're not beheaded if you oppose science, but you are ridiculed, and you are cast aside, and very much thrown under the bus in terms of your reputation. If I come forward with anything that's too outlandish and too much in opposition to current accepted scientific paradigm norms, it's going to be really hard to get through to people. And that's due to programming. And I'm not saying anything conspiratorial, that it's an intentional programming, but it's the way our psychology works. We become programmed by education and by ideas. And it's just a simple fact, and it's the same thing as religion to some degree. If we accept religion, we are programmed into this as a groundwork of our psychology and of our perspective. It's ingrained in our human nature to not be Jason is saying it's ingrained in our human nature to not be a heretic. So you're saying that we want to be accepted, essentially, like a tribe mentality is what I'm getting from that we don't want to be opposing what the norms are? Is that what you're saying? Because I could definitely agree with that. And feel free to add any more to that if you have anything else to say. And anybody else who has any questions or opposition or anything, feel free to throw it in before I end this. Right on. Fear... Oh, actually, my final point on my notes is almost exactly what you're saying, Jason. There's an inherent fear or intimidation of considering counter thoughts to scientific norms, and this is the same thing as religion. When I first started opening up spiritually and really considering the world and considering philosophy in an open-ended manner, I encountered a wall of fear, and this was an intense hurdle for my spiritual development as well as my intellectual development. I was afraid of considering certain things due to my Christian upbringing. I was afraid that if I thought the wrong thing, I might wind up in hell just from thinking it. And the same boundary exists with science. If I start thinking that, maybe astrophysics is wrong, maybe deGrasse Tyson or whatever his name is wrong, I am having to jump over a certain psychological hurdle in my own mind just because I'm intimidated to go against the grain too much. I'm intimidated that maybe I'm going to wind up being an idiot or a heretic on some level. And that's kind of scary to consider. And I know that for me, the religious concept was very, very scary. And it took a lot of meditation and personal empowerment to really overcome. And just to grasp the idea that thinking and pondering and being free is a beautiful thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. So that's what I'm going to end on is be free, consider, let's evolve, let's grow, let's help to change the paradigm. We don't have to oppose it and destroy it, but let's evolve upon it. Let's try to be as open-minded as we can in approaching spirituality, in approaching science, in approaching everything. Let's try to be as free of these programming as we can, or allow only a minimal amount of programming and solidification of our minds to form so that we can approach things as open-endedly as possible. I think the programming is inherent to some degree, but let's update the programming. Let's continue to evolve ourselves. Let's take one day out of the week to break down those programs and evolve them, or at least consider whether or not they are truly beneficial to our development, or whether they are just stagnant concepts that have been fed to us and we are afraid to question. Much love, my friends. I hope to connect with you all more very soon. Have a great night.